The security role elements in the deployment descriptor are used to list the role names for the application. These are the names that will be used by the security constraint element to indicate what types of users can have access to protected resources. Somehow, role names for the application will have to be mapped to group names in the server. With the Glassfish server, this is accomplished using the glassfish-web.xml configuration file. The final major security element in the deployment descriptor is the security constraint element. It is at the heart of how declarative security is handled in Java web applications. It has three major sub-elements. Web resource collection, which indicates what resources are to be protected for a given HTTP method or methods. Auth constraint, which indicates what user roles are permitted to access the protected resources. And user data constraint, which essentially tells the web application whether or not to use SSL. The web resource collection sub-element indicates the resources to be protected for given HTTP methods. For example, this block of code says that all files in the directory security/protected are protected when someone tries to access them with an HTTP GET request or an HTTP POST request. If someone tries to access the files using an HTTP PUT request, for example, the files are not protected. However, keep in mind that the servlet that provides access to the file may only implement the doGet and doPost methods. If that is the case, then the other methods cannot be used anyway. Nevertheless, it may be a good idea to simply leave out all of the HTTP method elements. When you do, it means that the resources are restricted for all the HTTP methods. When a client tries to access a restricted resource, the server uses the authentication method listed in the login config element to try and authenticate the user. The auth constraint sub-element here simply indicates that only clients that have a role of manager can access the protected resources. The user data constraint element here indicates that data, including authentication data, will be transported using SSL or TLS. The transport guarantee element can take values of none, integral, and confidential. In practice, values of integral and confidential are implemented the same way with SSL. Here's a little warning from the Java EE6 tutorial about sessions and SSL. Basically, it says that once you switch to SSL for a session, you should never switch back to non-SSL. Always terminate the session first. Bad guys can use the unencrypted session ID to exploit the session information that was supposed to be confidential. Finally, note that the entire security constraint section in the deployment descriptor could be replaced with a few lines of annotation in a servlet that controls the resources you want to protect. The actions here are just some that I made up for the slides. They're meant to be indicative of all the resources underneath the security/protected directory. Also, note that this restricts the resources for all the HTTP methods, which is the case you typically want anyway. And that's it for this brief presentation on web application security. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video.